Hello guys and welcome to the Sim Racing Time Machine. My name is Robin and usually I recreate historic racing seasons in Automobilista 2 on this channel, and I say usually because today I wanted to try out something new, something different, because instead of racing pretend classic racing cars on historic racing venues, I wanted to talk about these venues a little bit, because every now and then some racetracks get lost to time as they get abandoned, demolished, or maybe redeveloped into a housing or commercial area. And this happened especially frequently in the early days of racing in 50s, 60s, 70s, when racing mostly took place on public roads before purpose-built racing facilities became a thing. And that happened roughly around the 70s, 80s. But still, even after that, a couple of tracks were left to rot, abandoned or demolished. And today we will talk about a few of these, because nowadays we live in an age where digital racing has become a thing, and in the digital world there is no need to demolish a racetrack to redevelop the area into housing or a shopping mall. And we can still drive our pretend racing cars on these tracks. And today we're going to talk about 5 of these venues lost to time that are still preserved in Automobilista 2. And before we get going, maybe one thing to point out here: we're not talking about historic versions of tracks that still exist, like for example Old Spa-Francorchamps or Old Hockenheim. No, these 5 venues, they are completely lost to time and do not exist anymore in the year 2026. And we'll be starting with the track that we lost most recently, which is Auto Club Speedway in Fontana, California, also known as California Speedway, earlier in its lifespan. Now, we only lost this oval in 2023 when it was still part of the NASCAR calendar as the second round of the season, when the 2-mile oval saw its last big event. The Speedway had a pretty short lifespan as it was only opened in 1997, but as a high-speed oval it was pretty popular with racing fans. In 2000, it saw the highest average speed over a lap in IndyCar history, when eventual champion Gilles de Ferran lapped the circuit at an average speed of 241.428 miles an hour, or, if you're used to the only correct and scientific measure of speed, 388.54 kilometers an hour. It was a staple on the kart calendar and later also in the Indy Racing League. The last time IndyCar did race here was in 2015 though. Afterwards, it was put off the calendar because of safety concerns due to its high-speed nature. Even though it was a short-lived racetrack, it did see a tragic fatality when Canadian Greg Moore, popular with fans and tipped to be the next great IndyCar legend, even rumoured to make the step to Formula 1, lost his life in a crash in 1999 here. Next to IndyCars, the other big US series coming here was, as already mentioned, NASCAR, which had the track on its calendar from 1997 all the way to 2023, and it saw some Hollywood action as well, as the 24 Hours of Daytona scene in the Ford vs Ferrari movie starring Matt Damon and Christian Bale. That scene of the 24 Hours of Daytona was filmed at the Fontana Oval, so yeah, this one has been in a Hollywood production as well. 3 years now after the circuit's closing, most of it has been demolished and redeveloped into an industrial area with warehouses and such. Originally, it was planned to still reuse its facilities and create a half-mile short oval, much like Bristol in its place, but these plans have been put on hold, and right now it looks like there won't be any sort of racing in Fontana anytime soon. Now, the Automobilista series is famous for its representation of South American, especially Brazilian racing series, with Racer Studios being based in Brazil. So it is unsurprising to have some Brazilian tracks on this list, and this is the first of a total of 2. the Autodromo Internacional de Curitiba, and remarkably, this and also the other track later is not some small Brazilian club circuit that never saw any racing outside of the national level. No, this one saw some big international racing series coming here as well. The circuit was opened in 1967 and closed in 2022, after which it was supposed to be redeveloped into an area with residential and commercial towers according to Wikipedia. It is hard to find any information on the area after that. All I know for sure is that the track was closed in 2022 and demolition was started. So if you are from there, speak Portuguese and or have some more info, please share with us in the comments down below, because I'd really be interested to know what happened to that track. What we know for sure is what happened at that circuit when it was still in operation. By drivers, it was described as a challenging mix of high-speed and medium-speed corners. By WTCC drivers, it was compared with Oschersleben, only with a much more dramatic elevation change. Sounds great, to be honest, and it really is, as this track is one of the hidden gems in AMS2 in my opinion. Of course, it saw a lot of Brazilian racing with all the major series, Brazilian Stock Car, which raced here until 2021, Sprint Series Formula Truck or Brazilian Formula 3 visiting the track regularly. But on an international level, this circuit hosted the Brazilian rounds of the popular FIA World Touring Car Championship from 2006 to 2012, as well as the World Series by Nissan in 2002, which was an international open wheel championship that saw a lot of future F1 drivers throughout its existence. A round of the as popular as short-lived A1 GP series was also set to be held here in 2006, but the financially challenged series had to reschedule, so unfortunately Curitiba never saw the World Cup of Motorsport race here. I really recommend you to try out this track if you haven't done so already. Unlike some of the other tracks, this is part of the base game and you don't have to pay anything extra to experience this circuit that sadly is no more in real life. And we stay in Brazil for the next one, and this might be the highest profile track on the list, as we're talking about the Autodromo Internacional Nelson Piquet in Rio de Janeiro, also known as Jacarepaguá to some of you. This track hosted the Brazilian Grand Prix in Formula 1 throughout the 80s before it was replaced by the beloved Interlagos circuit, still on the calendar today and one of the absolute fan favourites. But that was far from the end of that track. After Formula 1 left, they built a roval around the circuit and lured the Car Championship here in the late 90s during IndyCar's split era. But not only four-wheeled racing happened here, as MotoGP held its Brazilian rounds at this circuit until 2004. It consisted mainly of medium-speed corners, but one of the main criticisms has always been the lack of elevation and variety in corners, and I see that. Of all the circuits of international pedigree in Brazil, this might be the most boring, especially if you compare it with Interlagos or the previously showcased Curitiba. Still though, I think you can get some enjoyment out of this track. Now, the Grand Prix circuit has been around until 2005, then plans begin to demolish part of the track to create some sporting venues in that area, and only a shortened 3.3 kilometer version of the track remained, which you can also find in AMS2 by the way, but this shortened version only existed until 2012, when the Jacarepaguá circuit was fully demolished to make room for training grounds for the 2016 Olympics in Rio. Now, I'm not sure what exactly happened with these venues, but criticism was immense of how many venues of these games went into disrepair and were completely abandoned, so I would love to know what happened with the area and if at least the venues were put into more sustainable use. If anybody, maybe even from Brazil, has some more info about that, again, a comment is very much appreciated. I couldn't find any information past 2016 about these grounds. The fourth track on our list is a temporary circuit in the United States. We are talking about the track at the Cleveland-Burke Lakefront Airport in, well, Cleveland, Ohio, obviously. Now, this is a bit of a special case because in theory that airport does still exist and has not been demolished. However, not a single race has happened here since 2007. The temporary airfield circuit has been around in IndyCar/kart since the early 80s, and it got slightly modified in 1990, and this is the version of that track featured in AMS2. Now, when the split happened in American Open Real Racing, Cleveland stuck with kart, as most non-ovals did, and at the beginning of the split, that was the winning horse to put your money on. Later though, kart, by the end called Champ Car, died towards the end of the noughties and was remerged with the Indy Racing League to what we now know as IndyCar again. And with Champ Car, the race at Cleveland died as well. The circuit layout may not look very spectacular, and neither does the circuit. It's an airfield, what do you expect? But the racing that happened at this circuit was spectacular, as you have an immensely wide track and you can go side by side pretty much anywhere, with the bumps being a challenge to both material and drivers. So no wonder this event quickly became a fan favourite. But as I said, IndyCar never returned, and a return to this venue doesn't seem likely at all, even though in 2025 attempts to revive the event at Cleveland did appear, but on a temporary circuit downtown. So for now, it seems the only racing that you can have at the Cleveland Lakefront Airport is in Automobilista 2. And last but not least, the final circuit of today's video brings us to Europe, more precisely Germany, and this circuit has been lost the earliest of all of the 5 we were talking about today. We're talking about the almost forgotten Nürburgring Südschleife. Now I know what I said at the beginning, you may count this as a historic version of the Nürburgring, which still exists today, but hear me out. Back then, the Nürburgring were 2 tracks, the Nordschleife, which still exists today, and the Südschleife, the one we talk about now. Now, an argument could be made that in its place the Nürburgring Grand Prix circuit was created, but that is an entirely different circuit, built from the ground up, that shares not a single bit of DNA with the Südschleife, other than, for example, modern versions of Hockenheim or Spa-Francorchamps, which still use parts of the old circuits and can be seen as evolutions of their historic counterparts. The Südschleife was built together with the Nordschleife in 1925, and it existed until the new Grand Prix circuit broke ground in 1982, but was already closed for racing in 1974. Not all of it is lost though, as some parts still exist as public roads, and some are used as supporting roads and trails for the Grand Prix circuit. But as a racetrack, this one is completely lost to time. Back then, it was mostly smaller and junior series making use of it, as all the headline events such as F1, the 1000 km race or DRM took place at the Nordschleife, or sometimes even at the very short Betonschleife, which is just the 2 straights around the pit building connected by 2 corners. Compared to the Nordschleife, it had less amounts of running through the forest, as this one rather went through the hills and fields towards and from the village of Müllenbach, and also briefly passes by there. So, if you will, this one feels a bit more like a street circuit on public roads, but in its essence and characteristics, it's the smaller brother of the Nordschleife. As far as I'm aware, Automobilista 2 is the only game out there which includes the Südschleife as first-party original content, and that, I think, is pretty cool, as this is definitely a more niche historic venue and therefore fits perfectly with the Automobilista 2 content catalogue. So, there we have it, 5 racing circuits lost to time, still preserved in Automobilista 2. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like, and if you want to see me race actual cars in Automobilista 2 on some of these tracks, maybe check out some other videos I do, and maybe even subscribe to that channel. Now all that's left for me to say is goodbye, and hopefully see you soon.